Okay, hi everybody. So now we're week 4. Last week, if you recall, right, we talked about the focus was suburbia, and we talked about the influence of TV and civil rights, and we talked about surf culture, and I mentioned the counterculture getting a foothold. Okay. Well, this week now we look a little more at foreign policy, the outside threats, if you will, to the culture, or the outside challenges to the culture, dealing in particular with the Cold War. Right, the United States versus the Soviet Union. Now, Cold War meaning it's not a shooting war. Shooting war, you know, like Korea, World War I, World War II. Those are called hot wars, where there's bullets flying. But a Cold War is a philosophical war. We're going to position ourselves to challenge our foe, if you will. We'll fight proxy wars. We'll support this group against their foe, who the Soviets are supporting. For example, if there's like a war in the Sudan, if the North Sudanese are supported by the Soviets, the Soviets won't be there, but the money will pour into the North to try to help them. Well, the U.S. would support the Southern Sudanese people and pour money into that. So proxy wars and things like that are going to be fought. Okay, so we're gonna look at that, and of course Vietnam, a tragic time, if you will, in American history. Keeping in mind, Vietnam, we get started, and somebody involved in Vietnam in the 1950s, right, with advisors and things, and that war takes America through the 60s, and we don't get out of Vietnam until the Nixon administration in the 70s. So it's a long, really, bottom line, ugly history in American history. We learn a lot from it. The way we treat our soldiers and the way we treat our veterans today goes a long way to the poor treatment we had for those men and women in Vietnam. So we have to learn from that. But again, at the same time, we have to look at why we were there and what caused some of those problems that were there. And that's what we're going to do this week. Okay? And again, staying with the 60s, and what we're looking at, again, thinking Cold War in Vietnam. Vietnam is kind of the Cold War in action, right? No question about it. The North Vietnamese, the communists, funded by the Soviets and the Chinese. The South Vietnamese, the capitalists, if you will, funded and supported by the United States. So that's the big proxy war, right? Vietnam is the classic example. Cold War, us versus them, but not on the battlefield, but funneling and trying to support our ideas versus their ideas. The fear that communism would spread is ripe in the 1960s. The fear that was called the domino theory. If one country falls to communism, the next to fall, the next to fall. And next thing you know, communism controls the world and challenges the American way of life. So we're gonna meet that headlong in Vietnam, even though it doesn't work out very well in the end, as we'll see. But we also talk, again, a lot of things go on TV. It plays a big part of Vietnam. TV, as I mentioned last week, really kind of helps shape how we think about issues. In the 60s, we now get the moon landing, right? The idea of landing a man on the moon, as Kennedy tells us. All right, so we start the space program, really, it's probably a better way to say that. That all takes off. And it's another way to fight the Cold War, because it's a technological idea. If we can show that Americans are better than them, our way of life is going to be better. So those are the things that we're going to look at. And in particular, there's a wonderful canopy clip in your material this week dealing with the year 1964. Okay, and in 1964, Freedom Summer's going on in 1964. Vietnam is at its height in 1964. You have so many things happening in 1964. And again, I'll talk more about these in the live lecture. But you want to look at that. The Beatles come over during this time, and that British invasion and so forth is happening. So in this week, what's going to happen is a little different in your discussion. We want you to create a PowerPoint this week, okay? And we want you to look at a thing called Woodstock, right? That maybe we're all familiar with and heard about. But we want you to look at one of the acts from Woodstock and create a PowerPoint that kind of says, okay, here's what they were. Here's what that act was. Here's what the act did. Here's what the message was. Kind of a little interpretive activity, if you will, in a PowerPoint. Okay, and again, as I say, I'll talk more about it in the live lecture. But the writing piece we have you do is a very good one. We've been doing this for a while. We want you to find a song, okay, that talks about the Vietnam War, and look at those lyrics, and then you're going to interpret those lyrics based upon, the Vietnam War and what those lyrics mean. What's the message behind the song? We did a similar thing last week in our discussion, right, when we're looking at what the song said about suburbia. Well, this week we're going to write about the lyrics and what they say about the Vietnam War. Okay, Fortunate Son is a great one to look at if you're looking for a song to do the lyrics. That you look at what those lyrics are, and that's a classic example of what would be a protest song against Vietnam. And the vast majority, can't think off the top of my head of a Vietnam support song. Right? There's the counterculture that erupts in the 60s erupts out of Vietnam, and our dislike for Vietnam and our distrust in the government's handling of that war. Okay, so that's what we're going to do this week. This week it's Cold War, Vietnam kind of focus. You know, that counterculture that erupts. We see, as I said, and we see them at Woodstock. So this week it's more of a counterculture focus and what drives the counterculture and what they want. All right. So again, if you have any questions, all right, never hesitate to contact me. I look forward to reading your papers and your discussions. Have a good week. Bye now.